Hi, everyone. Welcome to Art World Season 3. I'm your co-host, Michael Connor, here with Josh Goldblum of Art World, and we are very pleased today to welcome as our guest artist Sam Lavigne. For those of you not familiar, Rhizome is a digital art organization founded in 1996 by artist Mark Tribe. That makes this our 30th anniversary. We're based in New York City and online, and as some of you may be aware, we've been we've been a part of the new museum for many years, kind of a partner organization housed there, which has been an exciting time for us too, as the museum has been reopening. So, big transformational year, and we're celebrating in part by doing this conversation series with Josh, where we speak to artists from Rhizome's community, past and present, to just kind of reconnect with, the people that have really shaped our field. And it's been really fun. We have a format which is 30 minutes of an artist presenting, give or take, followed by an opportunity for everyone that's here to ask questions, which you can put in the chat or ask camera on if you feel comfortable. And yeah, so Sam Levine is an artist who, many of you will know well from his past collaborative works. In particular, his most frequent collaborator, Tiga Brain, has been a frequent collaborator of Rhizome. Because of this Zoom format, sort of a nice opportunity to speak to them each individually because they each do have their own solo practices, which are somewhat distinct. But they were commissioned by Rhizome a few years ago for a fantastic project that looked at the Enron email database, which is one of the largest kind of natural language corpuses that floated around free to use in the early days of AI. So many of our early language models were trained on the emails of the workers of Enron Corporation, um, which is a very strange note in the history of how language models have developed. So Sam and Tika did a great project with Rhizome a few years ago on that. Their work, explores climate and data, was featured in a great exhibition at Pioneer Works last fall. But I had the opportunity to see Sam present about his solo practice, and also about his work focusing on cops at a presentation last fall, and I really enjoyed it. And so that, I think, is what he's going to be bringing to us here today. So if that sums it up, I'll hand it over to you now to take us away. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks so much for having me. And I just want to say, I see so many like friendly and familiar faces in the crowd, and it's from people from all over the world. So it's really like it's just so great. I'm really, yeah, people, some of you I haven't talked to in a while, and I'd love to, reconnect and catch up with everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully I'll do this right. Okay, can you all see a job creator brick? And now can you see a a, a thing that says cop stuff? Just someone just shout it out because I can't see my screen anymore. Okay, thank you. Okay, great. Um, yeah, so I tend to I've tended to make a lot of projects about cops over the last, I don't know, last few years. And I think I've probably made about 11 cop projects all told, sort of depending on how specific your definition of the word cop is. Um, and so today I'm going to talk about as many of them as possible, probably not quite all of them in a sort of haphazard way. But I guess I'll just start by saying that I've started to kind of look at cops as a kind of artistic material, but they're not like the easiest artistic material to work with because even though they're like obviously very like physically and ideologically abundant, particularly here in New York where we have a huge cop population, they also tend to be somewhat secretive and protective of themselves. So in a way, they are kind of like a scarce artistic material, and if you want to work with within the medium of cops, you kind of have to like live off the land a little bit. Um, but anyway, yeah, so I'm going to show a bunch of projects, and many of these I'm showing as sort of like the digital versions of these projects, but they also frequently have like an installation or a physical component, even if it's not on the screen. I'll start with NYPD Koppelganger. Um, and this project really started because I had this idea that I could collect the face of every single cop in New York City. and I haven't succeeded, but I did manage to scrape around 11,000 unique cop faces, which accounts for about 1/3 of the total New York City cop population. And after I had collected the source data, I put the images through an open source facial recognition model called DeepFace, which is actually just kind of like a nicely packaged collection of facial detection and recognition models. And using this, I made what I believe to be the very first facial recognition system that only works on NYPD cops. So, it's a website, it works on mobile. You can snap a photo of a cop face, and if they're in the system, it'll tell you what their name and badge number is. And I really like doing works like this because they kind of help me, they help me understand how different systems operate. So, facial recognition, right? Like something I wasn't particularly familiar with before, basically, is a multi-step process. The first is you detect a face, which is just have the computer draw a bounding box around a face in an image. And then you create an embedding from the face, which just means you turn the face into a vector or series of numbers. And then finally, you compare those numbers to other face embeddings with a similarity function like cosine similarity. And through this, you're able to find the closest match. Um, and the idea of this project was that cops are frequently covering up their like names and badges and stuff at protests. So you could use the system to ID cops who might be acting inappropriately. But you can also just like toss in a photo of yourself to see what cops you most resemble. So here are some of like my top top doppelgangers in New York. And it works with celebrities too, of course. Um, and the other thing that's fun is like having access to this like facial data provides these different sort of other opportunities too, right? So you can also see what cops most resemble each other, right? So these are three similarity clusters from the data set. This one is my favorite because I just I love the chins, like they're very striking chins. And then other forms of analysis are possible too. So, these are like the most common cop names in New York. So there's about 1,100 cops named Michael, 674 cops named Christopher, and 609 cops named Joseph. Which means if you shout the word, the name Michael into a group of NYPD cops, you'll probably get a few people who are turning their heads. You can also do some basic emotion analysis. So here's what a pre-trained off-the-shelf machine learning model thinks the angriest cops in New York City are. The happiest cops and the saddest cops. I think it didn't actually, like, I feel like some of these people aren't that sad looking, but this one's really sad. The sad cop. I'm hearing a little background noise, but that's okay. And I guess I just want to say, like, as a kind of aside, when I was trying to figure out how to frame the project, um, I decided to go in this kind of like just to be a little bit more elliptical about it. So I kind of made it kind of silly. I called it Koppelganger, right? And something like less direct than just like fuck NYPD.com, because I've had some bad experiences in the past when my cop projects were like a little too straightforward. So this is like, as an example, this is like when Fox News wrote about me after I scraped LinkedIn for ICE agents and released the list as a CSV file. This is the last Trump administration. But actually, like nothing bad happened to me as a result of a result of Koppelganger. And I think if anything, I might have leaned a little too far into the kind of goofy side of things. And so, with that in mind, when my friend Kyle McDonald and I remade the project for LA instead of NY, we just decided to call it fuck LAPD.com. And this is another great, if you're in LA, a great resource because in my version of it, the first one, it's there's a server, you got to upload photos. It's annoying. Kyle, who's like a very good programmer, figured out a way to do the facial recognition entirely in the browser, right? Really cool client side stuff. These are the LAPD cops I most resemble, which I think are pretty good. But back to New York. Like I said, I have about a third of all New York City cop faces. And a good portion of that cop face data comes from like this really wonderful website called 50a.org, which is a searchable website of civilian complaints against NYPD cops. So in addition to 50A, which I just have to give a shout out to, I've scraped Twitter, I've scraped LinkedIn, I've scraped Instagram, but it's not enough. And I still have this dream that one day I'll complete my original goal of collecting every cop face in New York City. So I need more cop faces. And that brings me to the next cop project, which is Cop Camera, which is a website hosted at copcamera.lav.io. And you're meant to use it on your phone. And what it is it's a custom cop body detection model that automatically takes photos of cops and only of cops. So here's just like a demo using internet images. And the goal here, of course, is to get more images of cop bodies and then from there to extract their faces and badge numbers, because of course a cop face is part of a cop body. And you can wear that. I was wearing this around town when I was testing it out. I would put my phone like on like a necklace and kind of hang it upside down. And I had this funny experience where I was testing where I actually couldn't find cops right away, but somehow instead, like at the time it was like during the election, I immediately ran into Curtis Sliwa, which is just a funny aside. But I did find some cops in the field tests. And the system isn't perfect. There's a lot of false positives. Um, for example, the guy in the baseball cap is my colleague at the new school, not a cop. I mean, statistically speaking, he is a cop, but actually, he's not a cop. So I would love some beta testers here. And so if you're interested in helping out with this project, you can go to copcamera.lav.io and we can do some sort of like citizen science together and collect the missing 20,000 ish NYPD cop faces collectively, right? If you're in New York, if you're not, you could collect cop bodies from other cities too. Okay, so next project. So I was living in Austin for a while, and I made really good friends with a performance artist named Andy Flores there, and we had this idea that maybe we could convince cops to quit their jobs. So we started this program that we called the Austin Police Department Decloutment Initiative. It was a multi-part public service campaign. And we were trying to, prevent potential recruits from joining the Austin PD and also to convince existing members of the police force to exit their jobs. So we made this website. We made these nice posters also. And we really wanted to make a video. And to make the video, we thought it would be good if we could get some like famous cop and cop adjacent people to encourage other cops to quit. And I guess like if we had made this today, maybe we would have turned to like generative machine learning, right? But instead of using deep fakes for the video, we decided to do it the old-fashioned way, which is just to like pay people. And so we use Cameo, and you all know Cameo. You can hire like B-list or C-list or D-list celebrities to just say stuff for you. And in a way, it kind of is like operating similar to how one might use an image generation system, right? You like supply a carefully worded prompt to generate a desired outcome. In the case of Camera, you have this like very limited character count for your prompt. So this is what we used. And I should mention also we named we said that the person the video for was a friend of ours named Trooper, which was Andy's idea. So we said our friend is in a dead end job. He needs to quit. He won't listen to me, but he'll listen to you. This one was for Sheriff Joe Arpaio. So we said, give Trooper a pep talk about quitting his job, tell him to quit his job and start a new life. And then we add, he's a talented, bright individual who wants to make the world a better place. And then, you hit the submit button, the video starts to generate, get excited, your request is on the way. So I'll just play a brief snippet that kind of like is the end of this 7-minute video that we produced.
Hi, Trooper. It's Rudy Giuliani. It's often true that people do a job for a period of time. They complete everything they can do with it. Therefore, in that sense, it becomes a dead end. They're not growing anymore. And if you have this great love of giving back and of community, then there are many, many things you can do, both as a job for profit, for salary or profit, or as a charity if you're capable of doing that, in which you can feel tremendous self-fulfillment. There is nothing that makes you happier than helping other people. Well, God bless you, Trooper. I know you're going to make the right decision. Just take this all into consideration. God bless you, and good luck.
Hey Trooper, it's me, Officer Nene. I know quitting can be hard, but I also know the rewards that come with finding a job that is worth your time and worth your energy and worth your passion and your talents that you possess. If your love, if your heart, if your passion isn't in what you're doing right now, it's not worth staying in. You can always find a job, especially in this economy. You can find a job that will pay you what you're making. But beyond that, go find yourself something that you know is going to benefit you and make you happy.
Are you currently a member of the Austin Police Department? Quit today. Quitting has never been easier. Experience all that post-police life has in store. APD Decruitment. Together, we can achieve more.
Officer Nene, by the way, was like some cop who got famous for doing the Nene on film for some reason. I don't know. He became an influencer. Anyway, we had this rewards program where we were partnering with local businesses to offer discounts to cops who quit. And the way that it worked is that if you were a cop, you were meant to send us some kind of like proof of resignation. And then we would issue you this rewards card that you could show at local businesses to get discounts. And we had 4 businesses partner with us, including a cheese shop and a wig store. But sadly, no cops joined the program, which was, a disappointment, to say the least. Okay, so I'll just show a few other quick projects that I'll talk about, 2, I guess, like slightly meatier ones, and then we'll conclude. So this is a project called the Zooms, more working with cotton material here. This is from, there was a leak of 600 hours of police helicopter surveillance footage that got uploaded to the wonderful website, Distributed Denial of Secrets. I downloaded the 600 hours. I became very curious about what was happening when the camera was actually looking for something. So I wrote a program that analyzed the frames of all 600 hours of footage and extracted the shots only when the camera was zooming in. So it's kind of like an erasure in a way, where it takes this 600 hours of footage and reduces it to a single nightmarish hour of zooming. A few other ones. I just have so many cops. I tried to visualize all 700,000 cops in America. I scraped LinkedIn for people who had been endorsed for being good at skills like homeland security and counterterrorism and enforcement and surveillance and interrogation. So, on LinkedIn, you get endorsed for different skills. I set up, this is a really old one. I set up a system that would automatically scrape Yelp for reviews of prisons, and then it would fax those prisons their own Yelp reviews. And then I have even more, but okay, I'll talk about a few other slightly larger ones. So this project is from 2017. It's called Bail Bond. I should also say the next 2 projects they're about criminal justice, and they're also about financial redistribution. So Bail Bond was from 2017, and it was like this massive collaboration with like a ton of people, including Rhizome and Artwrld, Maya Binyam, and Francis Sang, and like many, many others. And at the time, it was 2017, there was this kind of like huge amount of like, I mean, there still sort of is, but there's like an even bigger amount of like sort of hype about cryptocurrencies, right? So the goal of our project was to kind of leverage this public interest in an obsession in cryptocurrency to raise money for bail funds. So the project was really originally conceived by Grace and Earl. And it was meant to be a kind of like SETI at home, but for bail. So SETI at home is like, I think it's a defunct project now, unfortunately, but it was a thing you could download on your computer, and it was the SETI program was looking for signals of extraterrestrial life by analyzing radio signals. So you could like download this program, and it would use your kind of like computing while your computer was like not doing anything else. It would use those computational cycles to analyze radio frequencies. And so we thought, like, what if we could do kind of like a similar thing? But you could use your CPU's idle time to bail people out of jail. And so the way that it worked is users would download this cross-platform application, and then when it was installed, it would run sort of discreetly in your menu bar. And in the background, the app was mining a cryptocurrency called Monero, which we chose because it sort of like relative to like something like Bitcoin, which uses up a ton of computational resources and requires like a GPU and stuff. Like Monero could be effectively mined at small levels, but effectively mined using just the CPU. And so it was like much more accessible, right? So you'd run this app in the background and be mining Monero, and then all of the Monero would go into like a shared wallet that we controlled. And then at certain designated intervals, we'd exchange that Monero for regular currency and donate the earnings to a bail fund. And for a large a chunk of the project, that bail fund was the Bronx Freedom Fund. Right, so you'd mine Monero, we'd take that Monero periodically, turn it into currency, give it to the bail fund, and then they would actually like bail people out of jail, right? And I'd say like what's like really nice about like bail funds in general is that the funds kind of keep growing, right? So like if you're out on bail, you know that amount of money is returned if you show up to your court date. So which means that like if you donate to a bail fund, the money that you donate, it kind of gets used over and over and over again because most people do show up to their court dates. And it's not reflected in this screenshot, but at kind of at the height of the project, we had about 500,000 concurrent users. No, sorry, 5,000, not 500,000. 500,000, 5,000 concurrent users. And I think in total, we earned something like $10,000, which is, like not like a tremendous amount of money, but as a gesture, I think it was like very kind of effective in thinking about really like just like what a kind of failed and nightmarish institution, the institution of cash bail is, right? And it was great. We had people like installing it like on their parents' computers and like on the computer labs at their schools and stuff like that. Okay. This is a more recent project about redistribution called Offset, collaboration with Tiga Brain. And in Offset, we are transforming, we still are, it's ongoing, instances of industrial sabotage into carbon credits. So I'll play a quick video about it.
Most people believe that industrial sabotage destroys value. They're wrong. Today, sabotage creates value. Introducing Offset, the world's first platform to transform industrial sabotage into premium carbon credits. Using rigorous scientific methodology, we calculate how much carbon is saved when activists sabotage infrastructure. We convert these savings into carbon credit commodities and then funnel the proceeds directly back to the activist. Offset your emissions. Create real value. Buy a carbon credit today.
Right. So basically, we were looking at different instances of industrial sabotage, turning those instances into carbon credits, selling the credits to consumers with these certificates, so people could offset their own emissions, and then giving them money back to the activists responsible for the original actions. And the way that it worked is that we sort of based our calculations on methodologies that are already standard in the carbon offsetting industry. So there's this sort of the carbon offsetting industry is like rife with like corruption and just like it's just like a terror. It's sort of like it's just sort of like a nightmarishly bad kind of solution to climate change. And there's like all these ridiculous things that are sort of happening inside of it. But one of them that's like particularly ridiculous is this thing called tenure accounting and or temporary carbon storage. And so the way that this works is imagine you have a forest, and your forest is absorbing like X tons of carbon per year, and you're saying like I am going to cut this forest down. I am going to cut it down, but I'm not going to cut it down for 10 years. So what happens is you can calculate the benefit of not keeping it forever, but just of keeping it for 10 years, of storing that carbon in the forest for 10 years. And then you can convert that into a carbon credit. And what we realized is that like a lot of these a lot of these activists who are intervening in emissive infrastructure were sort of doing the same thing. So for example, we looked at an instance where a group called Blockade Australia shut down the port of Newcastle in Australia for about a week. And Newcastle is like the biggest coal exporting port in the world, right? So by shutting down the port for a week, they effectively made the port store that carbon for 1 week. It's kind of the same thing as if you were like the owner of the forest and you decided not to cut it down for a week, right? And then we looked at a bunch of other instances of like Dakota Access Pipeline, Atlanta Forest Defense, right? And like a number of other sort of groups who have done these different, and sometimes individuals who have done these direct actions. And then we kind of got curious, like so we were looking at all of these like instances of groups shutting down infrastructure, right? But then we were kind of thinking like, what does this look like on I guess like the individual level, like so we started thinking like what does it mean, right? To say neutralize a highly emissive individual rather than highly emissive infrastructure. So we produced another methodology that allowed us to run the numbers on Brian Thompson's homicide. And the way that we did this is we had to kind of like develop what I think is the world's first income-based carbon footprint calculator, right? So like most carbon footprint calculators, I'm sure you're all familiar with like a carbon footprint calculator, right? Like you punch in like how many like miles do you drive a year and how many trips do you take in an airplane and like do you eat meat or are you a vegan or whatever? And then based on your consumption, you sort of figure out like what emissions you're responsible for, right? So there's a ton of like academic studies that look at this relationship between consumption and emissions on like an individual or sort of national level, but there's very, very few studies that look at income versus emissions. And we just managed to find basically like one credible scientific study that was kind of measuring like the relationship between income and emissions. And the study, I'm sorry, I didn't write down the authors. I think it's Jared Starr et al., but I can't quite remember. I can send it to you later, you all, if you're interested. But the study didn't actually like give us this equation that we wanted, right? But they did provide all the data, which you can kind of see in the upper left corner. And then what we did is we just plotted a line of best fit through this data that compares income versus CO2 emissions, and you get this like very simple polynomial equation that comes out, which is that your CO2 per year is 0.00031 times your income plus 2.85592, right? Okay, right. So if we want to calculate the carbon benefit of Brian Thompson's homicide, we have to do a few things. The first thing we have to do is we have to know what his yearly income was. And it was reported that at the time of his death, his income was $10.2 million. Okay. $10.2 million plugged into the equation yields 3,165 tons of CO2 per year, based exclusively on his income alone. Then to actually figure out like the total, we make some very conservative assumptions, right? We say, let's imagine that the victim's wages would not have increased. And let's also imagine that he would retire at age 65. And let's also imagine that his wealth post-retirement would not have further contributed to emissions, right? So we say his remaining working years are his retirement age minus his current age, 65 minus 50 equals 15. And then finally, we calculate the offset 15 times 3,165. And then the result is around 47 and a half, 47,000 and a half metric tons of CO2. Okay, and let's do one more, one last one, only tangentially related to cops that I just made. So I just wanted to talk about it because it's tax season, or it was just tax season. This is a similar sort of like project about bad math. This is called individual income tax body count, and it's a form that calculates your income tax body count, or the total number of war-related deaths that you have caused for your income tax contributions to the U.S. government. And to make this, it was just basically a research project. So I added up all the deaths that emerged out of every single conflict involving U.S. military, starting in 2001 and ending in 2025. So there have been a bunch of conflicts that the military has been involved in one way or another. If a conflict spanned multiple years, its death total counted. I counted its death total by averaging deaths per year. And then I looked at estimated minimum and maximum death totals for each of those conflicts, right? Using like as much sort of a variety of data sources, right? For the maximum death total, I also included an estimate of indirect as well as direct deaths, which is somewhat difficult to calculate. So that ends up with a kind of yearly death count, a minimum and maximum estimated yearly death count. Okay, and then to calculate an individual's contribution, you have to do three things. The first thing you have to do is calculate the total contribution of all income tax to defense spending, right? So that's like a percentage of defense spending comes from income tax. Then you have to create a minimum and maximum deaths per dollar, right? And that's just the total deaths that year over the defense income tax revenue. And finally, to calculate an individual's body count for the year, you multiply their individual income tax contribution times our deaths per dollar ratio. Anyway, there's a form online you can fill out yourself, or it's also a beautiful printable PDF. So that concludes all my projects about cops talk, and I just want to say, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sam. That was very, very interesting. And I've prepared a short statement. Rhizome and Artwrld condemn the use of homicide as a political tactic, even for the purposes of reducing carbon emissions.
I think that you should start every public speech with that from now on.
Really sets the tone.
Yeah. I thought we were going to neatly avoid that one by just focusing on the solo practice, but you got around me, Sam.
Knock it in.
Yeah. Well, I think that was fantastic. Thank you. Very provocative, as of course, many questions going in the chat. I think maybe a good place to start is the way that you talk about cops is very considered, because you have a language which is talking about using them as artistic material. And I think it makes me think about the conversations about bail block. Was it an artwork, or was it another kind of social critique? To what extent do you situate your work as art only, or is art like an is it being kind of instrumentalized to do a kind of political critique that wouldn't be allowed otherwise? How do you think of your work in relation to the category and that history?
Right. Well, I've noticed, I mean, I guess like one thing I've noticed is that it's a lot easier, um, like because art, well, I mean, it's a kind of sort of a confusing moment, I think, for art and culture because on the one hand, it's in a way we've been told and have felt that art is like fully sort of powerless. It's like a field that has no power inside of it, right? No political power, right? In a lot of ways, right? Like so, like it's very obvious when you frame something as an art project versus a political action that people don't take it as seriously, right? That it loses its threat, right? It's a way of removing threat from it, right? So that's kind of on the one hand. On the other hand, I think that we're seeing like the Trump administration really sort of like embrace this idea that politics is downstream of culture, right? So in this like weird way, even as they're like cutting all the arts, they're also suggesting that the arts have never been like more that they hold an incredible political power, right? And so I don't and I think it's like this, it's Steve Bannon, like maybe sort of, I think he thinks he's quoting Gramsci. I don't think Gramsci actually said that, but maybe I don't know, and so like this weird thing about, like this weird sort of elevation of the power of art at the same time as like it's being, as it's being like sort of, uh, uh, eliminated, right, in a lot of ways. But in either way, it's being taken over, right? And so I think that does speak in a sort of sense like to its potential power at least. For me, like when I'm making these works, I'm not like overly concerned about if they're like an art project or if they fit into like a different category, like a design project or a political project or an activist project. And I think each one is a little bit different. I mean, Bale Block, for example, was very much like an activist project. It was also like I think we were all very like open-eyed about how it was a gimmick, right? I mean, maybe gimmick is like a tough word. Maybe I should think of a different word for it rather than gimmick. But obviously, it was a gesture, and it was not like ever meant to be suggested that it was like a real solution to that problem, right? But it formed sort of like a talking point, and it did actually do something too. It did truly do something. Uh, I think that like uh, as many people at the time pointed out, why don't you just donate right to the bail fund and then you don't have to do this Monero thing? And they were right, you know, they were right. But I think also there was a huge when we made that project, there was like a kind of a huge it got a lot of press, right?
Yeah,
And
well,
so
you
that
had
it
the phrase rhetorical software, which I really liked. Was that part of the rhetorical software project?
Yeah, yeah. So we were working on at the time like this sort of through this framework that we had described as rhetorical software, which was uh, an argument made through software, right? That's the short of it. You're making an argument through experience, through software, rather than I mean, and it was because it was emerging out of the New Inquiry magazine. So the context there was that there were being a lot of arguments that were being made, with language, and we were trying to make arguments with software in addition to like sort of linguistically. Um, but I think that for some of the other works, they're and then but also Bale Block, got shown in museums and galleries too, right? So I think it was able to kind of do both things at once. But um, uh, I don't think that anyone particularly needed it to be in museums and galleries, for it to be a successful work, right?
Very interesting. I think there were some great questions in the chat. Joao, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Uh, Thanks for the talk. It was amazing. You have such a particular way of having allegories in your work is really fascinating. I wanted to ask, have you ever had any direct legal problems involving you or anyone you're working with? And how would you deal with that?
I have not had any legal problems with the work. I've had like other kinds of problems, like death threats and stuff, but not like and sometimes I did get a threat from like a cop one time on Facebook. Pretty cool.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, a cool place to get a death threat.
It's almost
Uh,
material again, right? You can use it to make another project.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about getting, and then LinkedIn, I got some funny ones on LinkedIn. The nice thing about LinkedIn is it had, at the time at least, all these autocomplete suggestions that were sort of business coded, you know?
Okay.
So, you're getting the death threat and it's like, oh, thanks, I'll take a look at that or whatever, like, that type of thing. But I mean, people that I've worked with have had some legal thing. I mean, I mentioned Kyle McDonald.
Mm.
Who I did that, we did that sort of LA version of the cop thing with, and he's got, I mean, this was years and years ago, but he got raided by, for something really benign, actually. I think he got raided by like the Secret Service, right? So I think that like, or the FBI, I can't remember, but like, these things do happen, right? And it's pretty tricky. Um, but no, I haven't really had any legal issues. I have a friend who's a lawyer at ACLU, and about once a year, I'm like, hey, it's that time again for me to like ask you about a stupid idea for a project. You can tell me if you think it's okay or not, you know, right?
All right, fantastic. Hasmin has a question.
Yeah, I guess my question is just a follow-up to that. I was curious if there's strategies you're taking intentionally to mitigate, like being targeted by the state or whoever it might be, threatening you. Are there like, yeah, strategies that inform how you go about your work? Does it change what projects you do or
Yeah, for sure. So, for example, with the offset project, we did talk to some lawyers before that to like figure out ways to make it like legal, and part of that was framing it as artwork that you're buying, right? So if you buy one of those certificates, they're a work of fine art, which I mean we did I think it's that sort of mitigates things. Also, the all of the actions were things that already happened. They're not future facing, they're past facing, right? So there are always, depending on the work and the risk involved, there's always some strategies. There's also things that you know as I'm sure like it's like not everything is public, like sometimes things don't end up being public, sometimes things don't end up really being like sort of framed as art at all, right? um and I think that like um I mean, I don't know if this is the kind of, I mean, I think everyone has like their own sort of sense of risk and willingness to do different things, and it is justifiably different for different people, and people are in different positions of sort of precarity and danger already, right? And all that needs to get taken into account, and particularly, for me, like I'm in a relatively privileged position. Sometimes I work with people who are in less privileged positions, and we really have to consider like what those risks might look like for them.
All right. Sam, I marked a question, but I want to throw a question in at you. I'm really curious about humor in your work, because I think like as I was going through your site and looking at your past projects, like some of them are like quite funny. And like I think actually even some of those stuff like with the cops and when you're tweening between, people with very loose chins, like there's an aspect of it that's like kind of humorous. But then there's other parts where I'm like, is this feels serious? Like, and I guess maybe it's not even about humor, but it's about tone. Like, how do you think about sort of like the sort of the emotional tone in these projects? How are they supposed to be received?
Well, I think they're all very funny.
They're all funny.
Yeah, I think they're all pretty funny. I mean, there's a few ones that maybe aren't so funny, but I pretty much think they're all very funny. And so yeah, the chins are very fun. I mean, like that's the thing. Like so I do like or at least they're like there's some sense of like amusement or sort of like pleasure in them, right? So that is something that's important to me in a lot of the work, right? And it's something I attempt to do, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it's like doesn't work, you know. But yeah, it's, and I think it's just it's really like a reflection of the material itself for me. So I mean, I think there's a lot of, even in like these like sort of like extremely nightmarish dystopian different sort of arenas we're all inhabiting. There's a lot of humor in in it too. As much as these things can be like terrifying and horrible, there's the sort of material itself. Um, in the very least, is absurd, right? And that is um, part of humor.
All right. Excellent. Mark, you had a question.
Oh, you kind of stole my question, but because I was also going to kind of ask about, yeah, like using humor. And I was specifically thought it was interesting you were saying the Koppelganger project and then transitioning that to just the simple fuck LAPD project. It was like, I don't know. I was curious about, I guess you were th saying that Koppelganger maybe leaned too much into the humor where like, I don't know, the message wasn't getting through clear enough. So yeah, kind of very similar to Josh's question, just about how you navigate when it's leading too much into that and not like being, I don't know, it's not like setting the right tone, I guess, like how you navigate it. Because that's something in my work I also have to think about, I guess, for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just got worried that like a bunch of cops would get really mad at me and like mess with me and stuff. And then they
Yeah.
just didn't care at all, which is fine, But like, I also, uh yeah, like I think maybe I just made it too silly. But now it's fine. It's okay that it's silly, you know. But I think also, I guess like some people, really didn't like understand, because I don't think I ever said it on the website that you could use it like that, like, there's a kind of a utilitarian, at least like tactical sort of thing you can do with that work, which was kind of the original intent of it. And I think that like I didn't explicitly say that. And then I think a lot of people just didn't get that that's something you could do, right? That you could use it as like a tool at a protest, for example, right? Um, which is like, I don't know like how, like, it's always a question, like when you're making something, like how like legible do you want to make it versus abstract. And it's something I am never sure. I've really always never, I'm never really sure about where to land on that question. And like, um how didactic. I mean, I think a lot of the projects are quite didactic, like so sometimes I'd like to make them less didactic, but my inclination is to make them didactic. So it's tricky for me.
All
Also,
right.
it's nice to
Okay.
see you. Mark was my student at UT
Oh, nice.
Austin.
Amazing. All right. We have a lot of different questions. Michael, how do you want to handle? Let's see.
I haven't
I'm
been
just.
thinking about it at all. This is sort of your,
Oh, I'll do it. I'll do it then. All right.
yeah. But
Nasser had a question. Let's.
Yeah, I was wondering, Sam, like, about like funding and resources to sustain your practice. And I was wondering if you've relied on like community sourced avenues. Or is it like primarily through like grants and fellowships? Because I know there's always like institutional agendas at play as well, and like especially thinking about like networks, like I was thinking of like forensic architecture, which is like tethered to Goldsmith, and they're doing like really urgent work, but there's
Yeah.
always underlying like power structures, and like there's also like different like forms of censorship that can emerge. So yeah, I was wondering if there are like other like ways like to sustain this work long term, that you could share.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot. I mean, okay. So first of all, like, so I was speaking about my sort of my positions. Like, I'm a full-time teacher now, right? So I get like, full-time university teaching salary, which means that like I don't have to sell the work if I don't want to sell it, and if I don't get a grant or commission for it, something, I can still just make it, and it kind of counts for my like job, right? Because it's the research component of my job, you know. And because I'm not publishing it through like a university, there's a lot of freedom. There's like basically total freedom, you know. So that's like a very like privileged position. That's a very I feel very 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 fortunate that I'm in that position. I also do get like grants and commissions, apply for things. Sometimes I mean a lot of rejections too. But sometimes like a we'll get rejected a bunch of times for a project and then just make it anyway, and then but then the making of it ends up allowing me to apply for other things. So I think that like there's different strategies. I think that the sort of the community funding strategy though is a very is something that I haven't done, and I um but I think depending on the sort of nature of the project, it's like a really a really good idea, right? And to also to look at uh to sort of like look at the sort of local small organizations that might be willing to kind of like donate or support, donate resources or support, these types of projects. They do exist, right?
All right, great. Okay, I think we have too many questions for the time, but Jonah, let's get to you, and then we have time. Throw out another one.
Oh, cool. Thanks. You guys hear me? Cool.
Yep.
Hey, Sam. Big fan. I was
Awesome.
just wondering I mean, your work exposes policing and surveillance systems, how they sort of operate through data automation, bureaucratic language. I was just wondering when you're building all the cop related projects or policing related projects. I'm a victim too. I do cop projects. How do you think about the line between critique and replication? So, like, how do you make sure
Yeah,
the
good
artwork
question.
reveals the system's logic, but without unintentionally reinforcing or normalizing the logic? Yeah.
Yeah, such a good question. It's such a good
Yeah.
question. It's really, and I think it's just like, I mean, I think that, so like doing facial like, doing facial recognition I mean, we just shouldn't be doing it at all, for example.
Right.
Right. So like, does that project kind of like reinforce the system that should be just completely abolished? Right. Maybe, maybe
Yeah.
maybe it's a bad idea. Right. Like don't really for me in that particular work I thought it was like kind of like worth doing it in a lot of ways. Like I was like, well, as long as we have this thing we should be using it against those in power, right? So that was my opinion about it, right? But I think that if you or somebody else had like the other opinion, which is like we shouldn't be using it under any circumstances, I think that would be a really I mean I think that point of view is extremely valid, right? And I would never, yeah, I would just be like, yes, that's valid, right? Um,
Okay.
uh, but I do think I think in sort of in general, I think that it's just a kind of whether you're just reproducing a terrible system or you're critiquing it, and I think the thing that is valuable is like when you do these sort of acts of reverse engineering or replication, like in the very least, what you're doing is you're learning about how those systems operate, right? And that to me is always worthwhile, even if maybe you don't even publish it or work with it again. Like it's become something that like you understand at a much more granular level, which I think is like a really important part of even if you don't reproduce it later, like of just like being able to leverage like a convincing critique, right? Um, and but I do think it's obviously possible to take these things like way too far, and I think certainly people have, and I think I'm probably guilty of it too at different points in my like career. Right. I remember one time a curator, I can't even remember what project it was. I showed them. They were just like, Sam, I don't want to like they said literally, they said you're reproducing the trauma. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean,
Yeah, that's a
but they
big
were right.
problem.
They were right. They were right. That was good feedback. And so I took a different direction, you know.
Right. All right, Sam, I'm not sure we have
It's
enough time for a question, but I'm gonna throw a little add-on that sort of synthesizes some things I saw in the chat. I'm very curious about distribution because you've done websites, you put things in museums. Obviously your work showed up on Fox News with you in front of a sickle and hammer. Like, how do you think about like how you distribute this content, and the audience for this content
Yeah.
or for these experiences?
That picture is my LinkedIn profile picture, by the
Oh,
way.
perfect. Okay.
It's like the Trotsky Memorial, or and um the Yeah, no, so like you know, I love making websites, so everything is going to be a website no matter what. And then also it might have other forms as well. And I think it just like, but no matter what, I just, I love doing a web scraping project. I love making a little website. And so I'm always going to be doing that. And that's just part of the practice, right? And then other things, frequently like emerge. And sometimes it's a bit tricky, honestly, to take something where I just wanted it to be a website and then figure out how to turn it into like an installation. But you know, that's why you have yeah, friends who have good sense of spatial reasoning, right? To help out with issues like that. Um, but in general, like I like sort of having this like these multiple approaches.
Yeah.
Love
Sammy,
it.
you really look at the darkest aspects of power and repression in our society and you laugh at it. And it is inspiring and remarkable to see it. And you know, you're looking where many of us don't always want to put our gaze. So it's really interesting to look at all of this with you today and a fascinating artistic practice. We have two possible avenues for next week. We're playing a little bit of date Tetris. We'll be back here at 2, another lively conversation, no doubt. But Bree Griffin will be hosting. I can't make it next week. She's my colleague at Rhizome along with Josh. And it will either be it's either Rosa Menkman or Hurrimas Angara. Whichever one it's not will appear on a future episode. Two very
Herdimas is so crazy and amazing.
Yeah, he's great.
I mean, they're both amazing. They're both amazing.
Yeah.
We got one vote. Great.
Thank you.
So as we're sort of wrapping up here, Sam, thank you so much. This was super, super interesting. How can people stay in touch with you? How can they support you, follow your work?
Yeah,
What would you
sure.
have them do in the world?
I mean, I've got the website, which is lav.io, and then you can just follow me on Instagram too, which is just my name, Sam Lavigne. Uh, that's
Fantastic.
it. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Sam. Well, this was really, really interesting. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Michael, thank you so much for helping put all this stuff together. Hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Stay safe out there. And we'll see you on a future Art World session. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, so, bye.
Bye.